Good morning. My name is Kyle Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Global Security, a new think tank based in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I'm very pleased today to be part of the Canada launch of the 2025 Global Terrorism Index. The Global Terrorism Index is the best report on the planet that showcases where terrorist attacks are occurring, what kind of mortalities we're seeing from these acts, and who are the actors behind this violence. If we look across the world today, I know many Canadians now are concerned about what's happening with our relationship with the United States. We're really concerned about security of our own country. We're concerned about what's happening in Ukraine, but we also have to keep a focus on terrorism. We can do all things at once. We've had cases here in Canada in the past year of potential terrorist attacks targeting Canada's Jewish community. We've had actually a Pakistani student try to actually go to New York to commit a terrorist attack against the Jewish community in Brooklyn. So we have to also be aware that global events, crises, can see people commit violent actions in Canada or travel to some of our neighboring countries or abroad to commit these acts. So this is a serious issue. It's a human rights issue. We need to work to counter global terrorism, and we're very pleased today to have this discussion to bring to the Canadian people and to the Canadian media to understand what's happening globally and how should our domestic and foreign policies adjust to these changing patterns of violence. With that, I'd like to pass the floor to Michael Collins of the Institute for Economics and Peace.
Thank you very much, Kyle, and good morning, everyone. So the Global Terrorism Index aims to assess the impact of terrorism. It covers 163 countries around the world. It looks into deaths, incidents, injuries, and kidnappings, and weights those over a 5-year period to be able to better understand some of the long-term impacts of terrorism around the world. We look into broader thematic trends, the geographical landscape, as well as the groups that are most active at any particular point in time. So terrorism remains largely concentrated within a small set of countries. In 10 countries essentially account for 85% of terrorist activity worldwide. Burkina Faso continues to be the country most impacted by terrorism this year, followed by Pakistan and by Syria. So Syria has seen an increase in attacks and in deaths, and in Pakistan has hit over 1,000 deaths in 2024, which is the most since 2014. Niger has seen the largest increase in terrorism last year. Now in Niger and in Sahel broadly, there is significant instability right now, significant conflict. A number of military coups have happened in recent years, and also shifts in geopolitical dynamics as well. So it'll be interesting to see as and when these different countries transition from security partnerships with the United States, with the EU and with France towards Russia and China, what exactly that impact on terrorism will be. In the MENA region, it's the second year of deteriorations after a number of years of improvement, largely driven by Syria and by Iran, although we have seen an ongoing improvement in measures of terrorism in Iraq specifically. In fact, a 90% improvement in terrorism since 2007, 2015, although there were still 70 terrorist attacks in the country. In South Asia, we saw an improvement in Myanmar. We saw a small improvement in Afghanistan. But again, in Pakistan, the situation significantly deteriorated. Now, the Taliban in Pakistan are the most significant group there, and in fact, the group that have grown the most over the last year. The Islamic State continues to be the deadliest organization around the world, responsible for over 1,800 deaths last year. This accounts for all provinces and affiliates. The Islamic State Khorasan chapter, ISK, was responsible for a number of high-profile attacks last year, including the Crocus concert hall attack in Moscow, as well as a significant attack in Iran as well. Jainim and Al-Shabaab are the two additional groups responsible for essentially the largest amount of terrorist deaths last year overall. I'd like to touch on terrorism in the West, which does actually represent an extremely small sliver of terrorism worldwide, although there are a number of concerning trends that we've been seeing, namely the increase of lone wolf attacks. These are attacks by people who are acting as individuals rather than in coordination with any particular group, and increasingly a mix of ideologies as well, be those a sample of the left and a sample of the right, religiously motivated or otherwise. Another concerning trend is the fact that an increasing number of these attacks are perpetrated by by youth, essentially children. Up to 40% of perpetrated and planned attacks in the UK, according to the Home Office, were perpetrated by people under 18 years old. That's 1 in 5 in Europe. Now, in conjunction, these things make it significantly more difficult to be able to intercept this form of attack. Number one, a mix of ideologies. Secondly, there's a lot less of a communication trail. And thirdly, financial flows don't exist in the way that they would with particular groups as well. So I'd like to end with the very close correlation that we see between conflict and terrorism. 98% of terrorist attacks occur in a conflict situation. Now, there's currently more conflicts around the world than at any point since the end of World War II. Conflict is becoming significantly more difficult to resolve. It's becoming a lot more asymmetric, enabling small non-state actors to be able to keep fighting against much larger forces for much longer periods of time. As a consequence, over the last 50 years, we've seen that conflicts have been resolved or victorious by a particular party significantly less than they used to, from 50% to 5%. Similarly, conflicts ending in peace agreement have gone from almost 25% in the 1970s to less than 5% today. In conjunction, this indicates that conflict, even if the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza are to be resolved, is likely to increase around the world. And by the same token, we're likely to see an increase in terrorism as well. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Phil Gurski.
Good morning. So my name is Phil Gurski. I'm a 32-year intelligence veteran here in Canada, both with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and Communications Security Establishment. From a Canadian perspective, I think I will echo Kyle's comments. The Global Terrorism Index is quite simply the very best open source information source for terrorism worldwide. Something that I rely upon on a regular basis, having retired, no longer have access to secret or intelligence information. From a Canadian perspective, there's a couple of things I want to highlight very, very briefly. According to the index, there were 5 attacks in Canada last year that were labeled as potentially or likely to be terrorism in nature. They were all against Jewish institutions, be they synagogues or religious schools. One of the challenges we face here in Canada is to try to distinguish between what is an act of terrorism and what is a hate crime. There are different parts of the Canadian Criminal Code, and one of the categories that's growing in the Global Terrorism Index are attacks that are simply cannot be defined, or can't be definitively labeled as either Islamist or whatever. In other words, the motivation is not clear. And I think that trend's going to continue going forward. The other thing which I think is very important is the youth angle that was mentioned. These have challenges, pose challenges for CSIS, for the RCMP. We're talking about young offenders here. At what point can security intelligence and law enforcement agencies investigate these things? Also, the speed with which people are accessing information from a variety of sources. Our agencies cannot monitor everyone, nor do we want them to monitor everyone simultaneously, and that places a lot of pressure on them given their finite resources. Last but not least, there's also been a couple things that are very, from my perspective, worrisome here in Canada. One is the inability to decide what actually is an act of terrorism. I alluded to hate crimes. We have some cases where cases are brought to court and terrorism charges are laid or are not laid. There's a lack of consistency. And lastly, a recent decision by the Canadian government to list Mexican and other drug cartels as terrorist organizations is hugely problematic. To my mind, having worked in counterterrorism for more than 3 decades now, cartels are not terrorist organizations, they are criminal organizations. And when we blur that line between strictly criminal activity, which is used to gain profit, to gain territory, we're sort of mixing the waters. And I think when we label too many things as terrorism, again, we put a lot of pressure on our security agencies to monitor it, and we come up with a very muddled sense as to what terrorism is and what terrorism is not. Bottom line is, as Michael said, Canada is a very, very, very safe country. We don't suffer violence at the scales that many countries in the Sahel, in Asia, and Middle East do, and that's a good thing. But as Kyle said, terrorism's not going away. The Global Terrorism Index has been around now for 12 years, showing a steady trend of somewhere between 6,500 and 7,500 deaths per year around the world. Canada's not immune to that. We had the ISIS father and son arrested last summer in Toronto. Kyle alluded to the Pakistani student who want to go to New York City. There are still Canadians who embrace Islamist extremism ideology. They are the #1 threat worldwide, and that will manifest itself here in Canada, which requires that our government and our security intelligence law enforcement agencies have the adequate resources and financing to thwart the threat that we face.
I'd like to thank you for joining us today. For those who want to get a copy of the Global Terrorism Index, it's on the Vision for Humanity website. You can Google it, and we're more than happy to take any questions from any journalist following online or in the audience.
All right, this is just a reminder for journalists joining us online. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Ceci est un rappel pour les journalistes qui nous joignent en ligne. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée.
Just one point I would like to add, as Canada and its relationship with the United States faces a challenging moment, there have been rumors of kicking Canada out of the Five Eyes. There have been rumors of limiting intelligence sharing with Canada. And it's from that intelligence sharing that we have been able to save many Canadian lives, working with our American partners as well as the British, Australians, and New Zealand. So it's fundamental that if we are to prevent terrorist attacks in Canada and internationally, that cooperation between the Five Eyes continues, and that our Five Eyes members sends a message to the United States that Canada must stay in the group.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.